Welcome to the Catholic Commission for Social Justice and the Archdiocese Ministry for Migrants and Refugees. My name is Dominique Hephastoon, and thank you for joining us this afternoon for a really fantastic discussion. I'm particularly excited for this one. Climate change is a human rights issue, and today we have the wonderful Marcia Tinto, who is representing the Laudato Si TNT chapter that we have growing and mobilizing here in Trinidad and Tobago. And oh my gosh, one of my favorite people in the world, Miss Caroline Mayer-Tobey. So before we get started, please allow me 5 minutes to read the incredible bios that both these women have. So Marcia Tinto has been an environmental educator for the last 25 years. She holds a Master's in Science in Education for Sustainability from London South Bank University, United Kingdom, with a focus on sustainable development in the context of globalization and development issues, science, climate change, as well as NGO and community education. She majored in French and theology as an undergraduate student at Barry University, Miami, Florida. Marcia also received postgraduate certification in the following: Earth System Science from Weber State University, Utah, Climate Change Education from the Instituto de Estudios y Investigaciones sobre Medio Ambiente, Fundación Jorge Esteban Roulet, in Buenos Aires. Oh my gosh, Marcia, you really challenged my Spanish there. I apologize, my Spanish speaking community. Climate Change Science and Negotiations from the University of Columbia through the United Nations Sustainable Development Solutions Network. Climate Adaptation for Small Island Developing States from the University of Geneva. Marcia is also certified by the US EPA and PAHO WHO in health risk communication. She has been involved in climate change initiatives since 2001, working on programs under Article 6, Education and Training, at the UN FCCC, and was one of the co-authors of a climate change handbook for Caribbean journalists. She served on the board of directors of the Caribbean Conservation Association from 2002 to 2005. Caroline Mayer-Tobey is an attorney at law at Mayer and Company law firm in Port of Spain, with over 15 years of specializing in climate change, post-colonial relations, transitional justice, public international environmental and human rights law. She is the founder of the director of Institute for Small Islands, a research think tank focused on environment, human rights, sustainability, and cultural heritage. She has advised small island developing states and least developed countries at the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, the UNFCCC Conference of Parties, and negotiation sessions for several years, and is currently the delegate for Latin America for an Latin American Observer Party at the UNFCCC Conference of the Parties for COP P26 in November 2021. So that was a mouthful. And just to say that we have some very accomplished and well-established ladies joining us in our conversation today. Thank you, ladies, and welcome.
Thank you.
Today, our program. Oh, sorry. I've always this. I always cut people when I'm welcoming them. But today on our program, we have a very critical conversation to be had. Climate change is a human rights issue. And as we continue on into this discussion, we want to really look at what is happening with regards to the climate change movement globally, which both of you can speak to very well as locally. And then we want to really kind of hone in on how climate change is becoming a very serious reality for us within our homes right now, and what we can continue to see. So Marcia, I'd like to kick it off with you right now as a Laudato Si member, and this movement is really mobilizing globally. It is, for those who may not be aware, Laudato Si is Pope Francis's encyclical on the environment, and it's a particularly beautiful piece of writing where he calls upon humanity to make changes right now for our collective betterment. So Marcia, thank you and welcome.
Okay, thank you, and thanks for having me on. Talk a little bit about Laudato Si, because that's who I represent here, another hat. Laudato Si, as you said, is the Pope Francis's second encyclical, and it's about our common home. So it's about everyone coming together. Laudato Si, by the way, praise to you. And this was taken from the Canticle of St. Francis of Assisi. And it's about really looking at livelihoods and sustainable livelihoods for human dignity. So one of the things that I wanted to do really is to align Laudato Si to good governance, because very often as Catholics, as Christians, whatever religions we are, but particularly Catholics, because this is a Catholic forum, we are stewards of the environment. We do environmentally friendly things. We sort our waste, we conserve energy, we do all of that, but at the same time, without connecting it to our religion. So faith and the environment go hand in hand. And I think this is one of the major aspects of climate change, that it's about not just doing things in your as a civic duty in your civil life, but also looking at it through a religious perspective. So I am very fond of, well, not fond, but I think it's an amazing thing that the UN in 2016, they started the, well, not started, but promoted the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. And both Pope Francis and the UN have the same idea. Because for Pope Francis in Laudato Si, he talks about urgent action to deal with our ecological crisis, global ecological crisis. For the UN, through the Sustainable Development Goals, this is to really treat with urgent global issues. And these issues regarding sustainable development, because it's not just about the environment, it's not about money, it's about people. And that's the factor that is most resonating that we need to really look at, because everything we do is about people on the earth. So like St. Francis, for example, you know, he's a patron saint of animals, and so, but you know, he talked about Mother Earth. I think he was probably the first one to talk about Mother Earth, sister moon and brother sun. So family, the earth is part of us and we are part of the earth. And the thing that I also wanted to mention in yesterday's second reading was from the reading from James, where he talked about works, faith and works. So without works, you know, he was a little harsh, which of course sometimes you have to be. But if you are just talking about having faith and you don't show that you're doing something about it, it really means nothing. So it's important for people to realize that it's not the big things, but if everyone works together collectively, we can accomplish so much. So simple things in your daily life, for example, consumerism. Now that, and Pope Francis talks a lot about that, and production and consumerism, and it's also one of the Sustainable Development Goals. The whole business of the fact is we neglect the poor, and I'm zooming in now on Trinidad and Tobago, because based on what I do, I go all over the country, and there are people here, there are children here who are poor. And when I say poor, some of them go to school because the only time they're going to get a meal is through the school feeding program. And that's why they go to school. And the conditions, there are students who still, I know I'm getting passionate about it, but there are people who, young children who still go to school without shoes because they can't afford. So when we look at the poor, it's not in Bangladesh and, sorry to, you know, pinpoint particular countries on the African continent, it's right here with us, you know. And then we have the disparity, which is growing between those who have and those who don't have. and the whole business of consumerism and buying things, and I'm not condemning, I'm not saying that people are not supposed to shop, but we have to do everything in moderation. So we have to think about those people who do not have. We have to think about those who suffer, the women, the rural communities who are victims, I would say, to environmental degradation. So I'll just let Caroline come in now, to talk a little bit more about.
Well, can I, before we jump to Caroline, can I actually just re-emphasize everything that you've said there? Because what you speak to, and it's a critical point, is what Pope Francis refers to as the throwaway culture.
Yeah.
So everything is disposable. And to kind of give our audience a little context as to how Laudato Si became a priority in the first place, was literally what you are speaking to, Marcia. Pope Francis went out and he saw the suffering of the poor as a result of climate change that had nothing to do with them.
Yes.
Totally beyond their control.
Yes.
And, and I think that's an important thing to highlight. And you're right, charity begins at home. Earth, one, is our home. So we need to start with her. And two, we have these social issues here in TNT that we must address. We must bring awareness to, and we must act now to help those within our midst. So Caroline, oh gosh, I'm so glad to have you on the show. I've wanted you on for so long, and it was perfect timing because you had to come on with Marcia. This is a wonderful combination we have. Can you, now, your specialization as an environmental lawyer, but you also have a great depth of experience with regards to post-colonialism and the cultural and human rights aspects around climate injustice. Can you speak to that and set a context for what is happening globally now?
Absolutely, and I'm so glad you mentioned not just the consumerism and disposable culture, but the disparity between the haves and the have-nots, and then how it's completely out of the control of the poor. They are going to be the most affected, not going to be, they are the most affected by climate change, but they have the least impact on it. They have the least to do with causing it. So I think we can also extrapolate that onto small islands. So, people are listening to this in their comfortable climate controlled rooms right now, thinking, well, okay, that's slightly 1 step, 2 steps, 3 steps removed from me. You're in a small island. You're sitting down in a small island listening to this probably. And if you extrapolate that circumstance of you have the least contribution to the situation, but you are the most impacted by it. So the small islands are the most vulnerable. I wouldn't say the most, one of the most vulnerable groups that are just heavily impacted. They are so impacted by climate change. And we are seeing this with every year, there's a huge hurricane that just comes and takes out the Leeward Islands, and everything, we used to know all of the names. I still remember my father was in Hurricane Gilbert, so Gilbert stands out in my mind, but I'm beginning to forget the names of all of these hurricanes. Every year there's a new one. There's Dorian, there's Maria, there's Irma, there's Ida, there's this one, there's that one. And you're just like, oh yeah, which one was that again? And all of them. And we're just getting used to how devastating the impact is. But at the same time, again, we're seeing this from a distance. We are a small island here in Trinidad. So I wanna just explain for a second. I'm gonna take it back to a little bit of a bigger picture of what exactly are human rights. Let's get down to a little bit of brass tacks. First and foremost, are you guys okay with me jumping there?
Please.
Yeah, all right. So I'm just going to be reading, so don't mind me looking away here. So the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, they were adopted in 1948. And so this was the first legal document to set out fundamental human rights. And these are universally protected human rights. And that's a big thing in history. So that's about 70 plus years old now. And it's the foundation of all of international human rights law. So with the International Covenant for Civil and Political Rights and the International Covenant for Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, these make up the International Bill of Rights, and they're about 9 core human rights treaties and 9 optional protocols. But what is very important about this, and what it codified, was the universality. And there's a principle of international human rights law called universality. And this is very fundamental. It means that we are all equally entitled to our human rights. And it's repeated in many international human rights conventions, declarations, resolutions. And so this means that human rights are inalienable. They cannot be taken away. They should not be taken away except in specific circumstances and according to due process. So example, if somebody is, convicted of a crime, found guilty in a crime of law, of a crime in a court of law. So, and then it also places a duty, an obligation on states. States have obligations and duties under international law to respect, to protect, and to fulfill human rights. So the obligation to respect means the state must refrain from interfering with these rights or curtailing these rights. The obligation to protect means that they must protect individuals and groups against human rights abuses. And the obligation to fulfill means that they must take positive action to facilitate the enjoyment of basic human rights. So this is where it gets a bit kind of tricky. So climate change, human rights, what does the state have to do with that? So human rights in the environment, we're beginning to see a lot more states having human rights to a clean environment. However, it's codified, however, it's encapsulated in their constitutions. Because we're beginning to see more and more that to enjoy your full range of human rights, you need to have a safe, clean, and healthy environment. Mm-hmm. And it just makes sense. If you want to drink clean water, you need to have a clean environment. Mm-hmm. If you want to actually have access to that water, you need to have an environment that's not decimating the trees, that's not interrupting the water supply, the water cycle. So without a healthy, rights to life, rights to health, rights to food, water, sanitation, these rights are directly impacted by the environment. So protecting human rights protects the environment. Protecting the environment protects human rights. And it's a cycle of life. That's what it is. We are not these creatures that are separate from the environment. I like to think of the environment as a community, and we are part of that community, as opposed to humans being in a city and the forest is over there and nature is over there. So the recognition of this link between human rights and the environment has increased. And this is now I think people are now beginning to cotton on to the fact that climate change is, well, obviously affecting the environment, but it's also affecting human rights now, because the impact of climate change on the environment, the devastation of the cycles, the processes, just how, agriculture, droughts, floods, all of these things, these are impacting, do we get food in the supermarkets, in the markets? What is the price of them? Do we get water in our taps? Is WASA giving us water in our taps? Is it WASA's fault that there's no water in our taps? Things like, well, let's not go there. But so recently at the Human Rights Council, the UN Human Rights Council, Bangladesh, on behalf of 55 states, called the council to create a special rapporteur on human rights and climate change. So this is something that had been bandied about for a while, and it was kind of, left to the side and left to die for a bit. But now I think with the recent tumult, the turmoil that we're seeing in the world with the pandemic and everything like that, there is greater call for it. So you're seeing the push from the civil society, from indigenous groups, from youth, from all areas. And they want a stronger human rights-based approach to climate change. So this really is to support the most vulnerable. And I want us to realize in small islands that we are part of that. We are the most vulnerable. So as you said, Marcia, you know, we're doing some of us, not all of us, we're doing the things, you know, we're doing the things to protect the environment. We are either eating less meat, or we're recycling, or but it's not, we don't understand that it's something that we're doing that's a bit trendy, if you know what I mean. I think some people are kind of buying into the fact, oh, this looks good. Oh, I'm going to, you know, eat my organic and I'm going to do this. But this is a deeply important thing for our very survival.
Well, can I interject there? You know, I'm glad you raised the point, because there's still this belief that it's an optional thing that we may or we may not be doing. And that speaks to the fact that people don't fully appreciate how pressing this thing is right now. This is no longer optional. You know, and it's no longer for some of us to do it. It is now compulsory for all of us to make those changes at an individual level, or things are going to probably get, you know, not probably, they're going to get worse. We had a wonderful discussion with Prof. Agard last week, one of the lead scientists for the IPCC, and he said it quite clearly in that discussion. The weather system, it seems to be broken because of the rise in temperatures, and we need to now cap that rise. But somehow this hasn't really, and this is the core issue of this discussion today. It hasn't hit home. And
I think people don't really get the science of it. Maybe we need to make it more bite-sized and understandable. Warmer air holds more water. Full stop. This is why the storms are getting bigger. This is why the floods are getting more intense. This is why you realize the hurricane belt is kind of shifting. Like, we are getting storms here that we've not seen, you know.
Weather patterns, definitely.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. You know, I just want to say something really quickly, jumping back to what you said. And I want this to hit home. As a small island, nothing we do can change climate change. If Trinidad were to stop producing oil, if everybody were, and it's, people tell me it's irresponsible of me to say this, I don't think so. I think we need to understand that, like, the world order in play, you know, as a small island, we have no impact on what happens with climate change. It is about big countries. It is about industrialization. It is about these things, but you should still make those changes. You should still live that life. You should still clean up your act, and you should encourage other people to do so. And you should encourage and force your leaders to make a big stink internationally, because it is through your example and through your belief and through your faith that you can move and shape and change conversations. So I just wanted to say that, because yeah,
well,
go ahead.
I actually want to interject at this point is, you know, this is a wonderful opportunity to highlight www.thecatholicpetition.org, because the truth is, we are a mobilizing Christian community, mobilizing Catholic community, and you can make a difference at a global level right now. You can use your voice. You can go online, www.thecatholicpetition.org, and you can sign this petition that is going to the next COP26 UN conference. Because no, but it's the truth. Because
it's good. It's good.
This is where we can now make a difference. The Catholic community is, sorry to cut you, Karen.
No, please, no, go ahead. I interrupted you. Go ahead.
No, but the Catholic community is, you are part of a 1 billion strong membership, and you can use your voice. You can make a change, and that is the only way we're going to hold those developed nations accountable. Sorry.
And I would also like to say, it is the morality of our position as small islands who have no impact on this situation. We have not done anything to cause it, but we will be the ones who will suffer the most. It is the morality that actually grabs people by the throat. And I think that's why they have listened to us at the UN.
It's the injustice.
This is the UN climate talks is one of the few places where small islands have been listened to. Doesn't happen in trade, doesn't happen in many other places. But we have actually pushed that agenda because people are like, whoa, yeah, oh, wow, this sucks for you guys. Wow, that really sucks, you know?
Mm-hmm. No, well, Marcia, I'd like to bring you into the conversation here a little bit because sorry, go ahead.
I just want to segue into what Caroline was talking about and looking at sectors that are affected. Now, people talk about sectors and particularly in a socio-economic setting, but a sector is made up of, it's not a thing, it's people. So we look at the health sector, for example, and one of the basic fundamental things for public health is that you must have sufficient food, clean water, access to clean water, to proper shelter, to an embracing social structure that is positive, and also conditions that will help to fight diseases. That is basically what people need. Now, when we talk about the flooding, the storms, and so on, of course, as you know, the ocean, the atmosphere, there is a definite correlation. There's warming. So we look at the tourism sector, we look at the agricultural sector, and I know I'm jumping up and down here, but let me go to agriculture, for example, which is a big thing now because it's about grow what you eat. That's the slogan. We in the tropics have already the maximum temperature. And as we know, plants need to grow, they need water, they need moist soil, they need sunlight. When these things are compromised, as in there is not enough water, or there's not enough sunlight, or there's too much water, it then impacts what's going on. You have the introduction of pesticides, of weeds, of invasive alien species. So you have premature ripening of the products, of the produce, and also less yield. Now, how is that going to affect me? Because I don't grow bananas, I don't grow those things. But when I go to the supermarket, when I go to the farmer's market, I should say, because we're trying to support our local farmers, when I go there, it's more expensive because the floods have taken away most of their produce and they end up with very little. It's the same with the fisheries industry. When the fishermen go out, we pollute the waters. The fish are not able to survive. So they come out with a much smaller catch. And obviously, to make money, the price goes up. So it also affects our pockets. Okay, our biodiversity. People seem to see biodiversity as something, but it's an ecosystem that we all belong to. And when one component of that is affected, it affects everything. So again, with biodiversity, the degradation, and again, I'm going back to Pope Francis talking about, we can't have a conversation about environmental degradation without also addressing human and social degradation, because they are connected. We cannot exclude people from the conversation. Water, because of rising sea levels, you have a lot of intrusion of salt water, seawater into underground aquifers, which is compromising the quality and the quantity of water that we get. So it's not just WASA. I mean, we want to blame WASA for everything, but there is a definite problem. Diseases, and I'm looking at dengue, for example, which we would have chatted about before. There's a definite connection between precipitation. Right now it's pouring, but then it's going to clear up and the sun will come out. We've seen that kind of very bizarre weather going on right now. And this is ideal because there's water and there is sunlight and there is moisture, humidity for breeding. It's ideal conditions for these mosquitoes to breed. And I mean, Aedes aegypti, they cause dengue, Zika, chikungunya. So all these things are connected. They're all connected. Tourism. We may not think so much about tourism in Trinidad, but Tobago, that's their mainstay. Now, we're talking about global warming, but the warming is also happening in other countries. So the tourists are not, I know my cousins who live in Europe, they're not spending money to come down to the Caribbean anymore because they go off to Spain and wherever the seaside and it's warm and it's lovely. So because if you come down here, you know, there's a threat, you might end up in a hurricane. You can't, because we, of course, it's seaside tourism in the Caribbean, and this is what they come for. Then, you know, water issues, you have infectious diseases, and I just want to put a plug here that, you know, the present pandemic has nothing to do with climate change. So I really don't want people to think it's because of climate change why we have this pandemic, which I'll call the pandemic, that everybody knows. But the pandemic also has also put a strain on livelihoods, loss of jobs. You know, we all know what's going on right now. Many of us are, you know, mental health issues because your lifestyle. I mean, personally, over the last couple of months, I know 5 people personally who have committed suicide. And these are people who would normally not do this, but why they're not, they not just adjusting, but the support. And I'm getting back to faith. I'm not saying that as a Catholic and everyone should be a Catholic. No, but you know, your faith has a lot to do with how you cope with things. And I think this is something else that St. Francis, Pope Francis, I'm calling him St. Francis because it's interesting. He was a Jesuit and everybody was so surprised that he took on the name Francis because, as you rightly said, Dominic, when his ministry, he went out and he saw poverty. Because as you know, the Jesuits are into education and development and so on. They're not, you know, inclined to that sort of thing. And this is, I mean, he saw so much of that and he felt, look, I need to do this for our people, but it's not just for the Catholics, it's for everyone in the world. You know, so when we hear sectors, we are not to think about a sector. We have to think about those people who are part of that sector, who are affected once elements or from what's composed of that sector, when those elements are not working properly.
Yes. So, and you know, as you touched on the point that, you know, we are interconnected. We now have to see ourselves as a part of the global humanity, and the vulnerable amongst us, we could easily fall into that bracket. We already exist within our own country, which is only 1.3 million. And the way things are going, as you both have rightly said, prices of food could go up, quality of water, quality of the food itself. We are heading to a state of drought and famine and reduced income from our traditional external sources of income. So the truth is, it's now hitting home. And ladies, can you believe we are actually over time? I knew when I got together.
Yeah, this was going to happen anyway, because the conversations are going.
Yeah, but I do think that this has to be a continuing and ongoing.
Definitely.
Because we only now scratched the surface. You know, there's so much to discuss around this topic. The degradation of the earth, our inability to embrace the rest of humanity and see each person as equally valuable and important as ourselves. You know, this is, as both have rightly said, but Marcia, you spoke to it, you know, in terms of this now being going beyond, you know, we now need to live this social doctrine as part of our faith. We are being called to step up in a larger way, all of us, not just the Catholic community, not just the Christian community, humanity. So ladies, thank you for joining us. This will be the first of many conversations, I promise you. And thank you for all of those who tuned in for today's episode of Climate Change as a Human Rights Issue. There's a lot to discuss, and climate change is a very real issue affecting us right now, right here in Trinidad and Tobago. Let's leave it on a positive note. Before I totally sign off, what can we do? I would like to hear something from each of you. What can we do today to make this adjustment, to make our world a better place? Either of you.
I would say advocate, 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 action, action.
Love
You
it.
know,
Live the change.
yeah. And you have to be persistent with people. Not that you want to be obtrusive, but need to let people know, and from all levels of society, that we just cannot speak about it. We need to act, and act in your communities, act in your groups, your churches. So use the opportunities. So whatever committees you're on or
Social
extracurricular,
media.
yes, social media to promote what's going on. And I think, unfortunately, we have to be very graphic about it. You know, we can't just be, we have to show those photos that we don't, people want to say, we don't want to see. We have to show what's going on in these countries, and in Trinidad and Tobago as well.
Yeah, yeah. And I think to take it even a step further, for all those people who want to be Greta Thunberg, do it. Because you know what, in litigation, in climate litigation, they are actually winning on rights grounds, which means that they are actually arguing on the basis of rights, environmental rights, human rights, and they're winning. This is unprecedented in a way that has never happened before. So think about it.
Yeah.
Think about it.
Okay. Ladies, thank you once again for joining us. And as
Thank you so much, Dominique.
we're going to keep having this conversation.
Yeah.
So on behalf,
Thanks for having us.
Yes.
on behalf
Thank you.
of the Catholic Commission for Social Justice, thank you for joining us today and wishing everybody a good day. You can make that change. www.thecatholicpetition.org and learn about Laudato Si. It's such a beautiful encyclical, and you can check out, there's so many resources online, www.laudatosimovement.org. Please follow us and enjoy the rest of your day. On behalf of the Catholic Commission for Social Justice, thank you and take care.